After 43 years of marriage, I found my wife at a hotel with a wealthy real estate mogul. They had divorce papers ready and plans to turn my daughter against me. While she thought she was being careful, I was already 10 steps ahead, gathering evidence that would make her lover vanish forever. This is the story of how a 72-year-old engineer dismantled a predator's life without his wife ever knowing. Part 1. The First Crack. They say a man knows when something's wrong in his home the same way he knows when a storm's coming. There's a change in the air, a shift so subtle that most people miss it. But I didn't miss it. After 43 years of marriage to Margaret, I'd learned to read every sigh, every glance, every pause in her speech like other men read the morning paper. It started on a Tuesday in October, unseasonably warm for Chicago. I remember because I'd been working in the garage, restoring a 1967 Mustang I'd bought at an estate sale. Margaret brought me lemonade, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she'd put on perfume. At 3 in the afternoon. On a Tuesday. Going somewhere? I asked, wiping grease from my hands. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. Just into town. Need to pick up some groceries. Need any help? No. You stay with your car. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give a stranger, not your husband of 4 decades. I watched her drive away in her silver Honda, and something cold settled in my chest. Call it intuition. Call it paranoia. Call it whatever you want. I called it the beginning of the end. My name is Robert Harrison. I'm 72 years old, a retired mechanical engineer, father to 1 daughter, Emma, and until that October afternoon, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was wrong. The signs, once I started looking, were everywhere. Margaret had always been meticulous about her appearance, but lately she'd bought new clothes, younger styles, brighter colors. She'd started going to the gym 4 times a week instead of 2. She'd gotten highlights in her hair. When I complimented her, she'd wave me off with a nervous laugh. Just trying to take care of myself, she'd say. Doctor says I need to stay active. But it was more than that. There were the phone calls she'd take in the other room. The way she'd angle her phone away from me when texting. The sudden interest in evening book club meetings that seemed to run later and later. I'm not a stupid man. I built a career on solving problems, on taking disparate pieces of information and finding patterns. And I was beginning to see a pattern I didn't like. 3 weeks after that Tuesday, I decided to follow her. I'm not proud of it. There's something deeply undignified about a 72-year-old man tailing his wife, like some cut-rate private detective. But I had to know. The not knowing was eating me alive, hollowing me out from the inside. She said she was going to her book club. I waited 15 minutes after she left, then followed in my old pickup truck, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She didn't go to Patricia's house, where the book club usually met. Instead, she drove to the Riverside Hotel, one of those mid-range places that cater to business travelers and people who don't want to be noticed. I parked across the street and watched. 10 minutes later, a man emerged from a BMW. He was younger than me, maybe late 50s, early 60s. Tall, fit, with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and vacation homes. He wore an expensive suit, and when he smiled, I could see it even from across the street. That smile. Confident. Entitled. Margaret met him at the entrance. He kissed her cheek. She laughed at something he said. They went inside together. I sat in my truck for 2 hours, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. When they emerged, he walked her to her car, his hand on the small of her back. She looked up at him the way she used to look at me, 30 years ago, when we were young and stupid and thought love was enough. I drove home in a daze. The house was empty. Margaret wouldn't be back for another hour, at least. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in the dark living room, trying to process what I'd seen. 43 years. We'd built a life together. We'd raised Emma, weathered my mother's long illness and death, survived my layoff in the 90s, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and graduations. We'd made love thousands of times, fought and forgiven, grown old together. And now this. I didn't confront her that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Instead, I watched. I paid attention. And slowly, methodically, I began to gather information. Part 2. The investigation. I'd always been good with technology, came with the territory of being an engineer. While Margaret thought I was just an old man who could barely work his smartphone, I'd actually kept up with the times pretty well. I knew about cloud storage, about metadata, about digital footprints. And I knew that people who think they're being careful often aren't careful enough. Margaret kept her phone locked, but she'd never changed the passcode from Emma's birthday. One evening while she was in the shower, I went through it. My hand shook as I opened her messages. The affair had been going on for 7 months. His name was David Castellano. He was 63, a real estate developer, divorced twice, no children. The messages were, I don't want to describe them in detail. Let's just say they were explicit enough to make me feel physically ill. My wife, the woman I'd woken up next to for 43 years, was talking to this man in ways she hadn't talked to me in decades. But it was more than just sex. They were making plans. Real plans. Can't wait until we can do this every day, one message read. Soon, my love. Soon, she'd replied. I took screenshots of everything, emailed them to myself from her phone, then deleted the sent message. She'd never know. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together the full picture. David Castellano owned a development company worth an estimated $20 million. He had a penthouse in downtown Chicago, a beach house in Florida, and a ski chalet in Colorado. He drove a BMW 7 Series and wore watches that cost more than my first car. And Margaret was planning to leave me for him. I found the divorce papers hidden in her closet, tucked inside a shoebox beneath her winter boots. She hadn't filed them yet, but they were filled out, ready to go. She was asking for half of everything: the house, my pension, my savings, my investments. In Illinois, a no-fault divorce state, she'd probably get it too. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was Emma. Our daughter Emma was 38, recently divorced herself, and living in Seattle with her 6-year-old son, my grandson Tyler. She and Margaret had always been close, much closer than Emma and I had ever been. I'd been a workaholic when Emma was growing up, always traveling for business, always at the office. Margaret had been the primary parent. She'd been at every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game. I'd missed most of them. It was my greatest regret. Now, according to the messages I'd found, Margaret was planning to take that relationship and use it against me. She and David had discussed it explicitly. She would tell Emma that I'd been emotionally abusive, that I'd controlled her, that she'd stayed for Emma's sake but couldn't live a lie anymore. She'd position herself as the victim, David as her savior. Emma will understand, Margaret had texted David. She knows how difficult Robert can be. That line felt like a knife between my ribs. Difficult. Was that what I was? I'd worked 60-hour weeks to provide for my family. I'd put Emma through college without loans. I'd never cheated, never lied, never raised my hand in anger. I'd been faithful and present and boring, perhaps, but decent. Always decent. And now I was difficult. I realized then that this wasn't just about Margaret leaving. This was about her rewriting our entire history, turning me into the villain of a story I didn't recognize. This was about her taking Emma's love and respect, the one thing I valued more than anything else, and poisoning it beyond repair. That I could not allow. I've never been an impulsive man. My entire career was built on careful planning, on anticipating problems before they occurred, on having contingencies for contingencies. So I didn't act immediately. Instead, I formulated a plan. A good plan. A thorough plan. First, I consulted with a lawyer, not our family lawyer, but someone Margaret had never met. His name was Richard Klein, and he specialized in high-asset divorces. I told him everything, showed him the evidence I'd gathered. "She's planning to blindside you," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Get everything in order first. Financial records, property valuations, evidence of the affair. In Illinois, adultery doesn't affect property division, but it can affect spousal support. And it will absolutely affect how your daughter sees the situation." "What about my pension?" I asked. "She's entitled to half of what you earned during the marriage. But we can negotiate, especially if you have leverage." I had leverage. I just needed to know how to use it. Second, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, a former Chicago PD detective who'd gone private after 25 years on the force. I gave him David Castellano's name and told him I wanted to know everything. "Everything?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Everything." What Marcus uncovered over the next month was illuminating. David Castellano wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a predator. This was his pattern. Find women in vulnerable positions, women in long marriages who felt unappreciated, women whose children had left home and who were experiencing empty nest syndrome, women who devoted their lives to family and were now wondering what came next. He'd romance them, promise them excitement and adventure, get them to leave their husbands. Sometimes he'd actually marry them. Usually he'd just string them along for a year or two before moving on to the next one. He'd done this at least 6 times in the past 15 years. Marcus tracked down 3 of his ex-girlfriends and 1 ex-wife. All told similar stories. Whirlwind romance, promises of forever, then sudden disinterest once the novelty wore off. One woman, Patricia Hoffman, was particularly helpful. She'd left her husband of 28 years for David, only to have him dump her 18 months later. She'd lost her marriage, her home, and her relationship with her children, who'd blamed her for destroying the family. Now she was living in a 1-bedroom apartment, working as a receptionist at 62 years old, and barely making ends meet. "He destroys lives," she told Marcus. "It's what he does. It's what he enjoys." I listened to the recording of their conversation 3 times. Patricia's voice was so tired, so defeated. That could be Margaret in 2 years, I thought. Alone, broke, estranged from Emma, wondering what happened to the glamorous life David had promised. Part of me, a small, vindictive part, thought she deserved it. But the larger part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I'd married in 1982, the girl with the bright smile and the infectious laugh, couldn't let that happen. Even now, even after everything, I couldn't let her destroy herself. So I refined my plan. Part 3. Setting the stage. December came, and with it the holidays. Emma and Tyler were flying in for Christmas, their first Christmas in Chicago since the divorce. Margaret was unusually anxious about their visit, constantly cleaning, cooking, preparing. I understood why. This would be her last Christmas as part of an intact family. She was planning to file for divorce in January. I knew this because I had seen the calendar reminder on her phone. File papers, January 3rd. 2 weeks before Emma's arrival, I made my first move. I invited David Castellano to lunch. The look on his face when I walked into the restaurant was priceless. He'd been expecting a business contact. I'd used a false name to make the reservation, and instead found himself face to face with the husband of his girlfriend. "Mr. Harrison," he said, recovering quickly. He was smooth, I'd give him that. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." "Sit down, David. We need to talk." He hesitated, then sat. The waiter came by and we both ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. "I know about you and Margaret," I said simply. He didn't deny it. Another point in his favor, he wasn't a complete coward. "I see. And you're here to, what? Threaten me?" "No. I'm here to give you some information that might change your mind about certain decisions you're contemplating." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos from Marcus's investigation, David with other women, financial records showing his pattern of relationships, testimonies from his ex-girlfriends. Everything. "I've done my research," I continued. "You're a parasite. You find vulnerable women, promise them the world, take what you want, then move on. You've done it 6 times that I can confirm. Margaret will be number 7. David glanced through the folder, his expression unreadable. "So what? You're going to show this to her? She won't believe you. She'll think you're just a jealous husband making things up." "You're right," I agreed. "She probably would think that, if the information came from me. But what if it came from someone else? What if it came from Patricia Hoffman? Or Sandra Chen? Or any of the other women you've used and discarded?" His jaw tightened slightly. Good. I'd gotten to him. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, leaning forward. "You're going to break up with Margaret today. You're going to tell her that you've been doing some thinking, and you've realized this isn't what you want. You're going to let her down easy, tell her she's wonderful, but you're not ready for the commitment. You're going to make it clean and final. And if you don't, I'm going to make sure every detail of your romantic history becomes public knowledge. I'm going to send this information to every news outlet in Chicago. I'm going to post it on social media. I'm going to make sure that every woman in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your reputation will be destroyed. And in your line of business, reputation is everything." It was a bluff mostly. I had no real intention of going public. It would humiliate Margaret, and that wasn't my goal. But David didn't know that. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "You know what? Fine." She was getting clingy anyway. Too much drama, too much emotional baggage. I've got younger, prettier options lined up. I wanted to hit him. My hands clenched into fists under the table. But I kept my voice calm. "You're going to do it today. You're going to be kind about it. And you're never going to contact her again. Am I clear?" "Crystal." He stood up, tossed his napkin on the table. "You know, Robert, you're doing all this to save her, but she doesn't love you. She hasn't loved you in years. You're just too pathetic to see it." He walked out. I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at my untouched coffee, trying to control my breathing. He was right, of course. Margaret didn't love me anymore. Maybe she'd stopped years ago, and I'd just been too busy, too comfortable, too naive to notice. But love wasn't the point. The point was family. The point was protecting what we'd built together, even if she no longer valued it. That evening, Margaret's phone rang while she was making dinner. I was in the living room, but I could hear her voice change the moment she answered. "David? Hi, what? No, I don't understand." A long pause. "But you said we had plans." "We were going to." Another pause. Her voice was smaller now, confused. "I see. Okay. Yes. Goodbye. I heard something crash in the kitchen. A glass, maybe a plate. Then silence. Then the sound of crying. I stayed in the living room. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her the way I comforted her 1,000 times before. But I couldn't. Not yet. She needed to feel this, to understand what she'd almost done. After an hour, she came into the living room, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm not feeling well," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm going to bed early." "Okay," I said softly. "Feel better." She paused at the stairs, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might confess, might ask for help. But she didn't. She just climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Part 4. The Unraveling. The next 2 weeks were hell. Margaret moved through the house like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. She'd withdrawn into herself completely. Part of me felt guilty. I was the architect of her pain, after all. But another part of me felt justified. She'd been willing to destroy our family, to poison Emma against me, to rewrite 43 years of history. She deserved some consequences. Still, I wasn't cruel. I made her favorite meals. I asked how she was feeling. I gave her space when she needed it, and companionship when she'd accept it. Slowly, gradually, she began to emerge from her depression. And she never knew I had orchestrated the whole thing. Emma and Tyler arrived on December 20th. Tyler was 6 years old, all energy and excitement, talking nonstop about Santa Claus and presents and snow. Emma looked tired. The divorce had been hard on her, but she smiled when she saw us. "Mom! Dad!" She hugged us both. Margaret held on a little longer than usual, and I saw tears in her eyes. That first night, after Tyler was in bed, the three of us sat in the living room with wine and hot chocolate. Emma told us about her new job at an architectural firm, about Tyler's school, about the challenges of single parenting. Margaret listened with rapt attention, asking questions, offering advice. I mostly stayed quiet, watching them together. This was what I was fighting for, this connection, this bond. Emma needed her mother, and despite everything, Margaret needed Emma. On Christmas Eve, while Emma was out with Tyler visiting her old friends, Margaret finally broke. I was in the garage again, working on the Mustang, when she came out. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a cardigan, looking small and uncertain. "Robert," she said, "can we talk?" I put down my wrench. "Of course." She came and sat on the old stool I kept in the corner, the one with the torn vinyl seat that I'd been meaning to fix for 5 years. "I almost did something terrible," she said quietly. I waited. I was seeing someone. Another man." She looked at me, searching my face for a reaction. I gave her nothing, just patient attention. It started last spring. I was feeling, I don't know, old, invisible. Like I'd given my whole life to being a wife and mother, and now that Emma was gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. "I understand," I said. He made me feel young again. Special. Like I mattered. She laughed bitterly. God, that sounds so cliched, doesn't it? But it's true. And I convinced myself that I deserved it, that I had sacrificed enough, that it was my turn to be happy. What happened? He ended it. 2 weeks ago. Just ended it. Said he wasn't ready for commitment, that he needed to focus on himself. She wiped her eyes. "And you know what the stupid thing is? I was going to leave you. I had divorce papers ready. I was going to take half of everything you'd worked for and run off with a man I barely knew. I was going to tell Emma that it was your fault, that you'd been a bad husband, that I'd stayed for her sake but couldn't anymore." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Were you going to tell her about the affair?" No. I was going to make it seem like you were the problem. That you were cold, distant, controlling. She looked at me with something like horror. What kind of person does that make me? I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. It was the first time we'd really touched in months. It makes you human, I said. It makes you someone who made a mistake. A big mistake, but still just a mistake. How can you be so calm about this? She turned to me, genuine confusion in her eyes. I betrayed you. I was going to destroy our family. You should be furious. I'm hurt, I admitted. More hurt than I can express. But Margaret, we've been together for 43 years. I know you. You're not a cruel person. You were confused, vulnerable, and someone took advantage of that. She cried then, really cried, her head on my shoulder, her body shaking with sobs. I held her the way I'd held her when her father died, when Emma had her first heartbreak, when the world got too heavy to bear alone. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know. Can you forgive me? That was the question, wasn't it? Could I forgive her? Should I? I thought about everything I had learned over the past 2 months. About David Castellano and his predatory patterns. About the way he'd manipulated Margaret, made her feel special while planning to discard her like he discarded so many others. About the divorce papers she'd hidden, the ugly things she'd been planning to say about me to Emma. I thought about 43 years of marriage, the good years and the hard years, the times we'd laughed until we cried, and the times we'd fought until we couldn't speak, the mortgage we'd paid off together, the daughter we'd raised, the life we'd built, brick by brick, year by year. Yes, I said finally. I can forgive you. It wasn't entirely true, not yet. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process, a decision you make over and over again until one day you realize you're not angry anymore. But it was a start. She cried harder, relief and shame and grief all mixed together. We sat in the garage for a long time, not saying anything, just being together in the wreckage of what we'd almost lost. Part 5. The Final Revelation. Christmas Day was better than I'd hoped. Tyler opened his presents with the kind of manic joy only a 6-year-old can muster. Emma laughed more than I'd seen her laugh in years. Margaret cooked a feast: turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, 3 kinds of pie. We played board games and watched Christmas movies, and, for a few hours, we were just a normal family, happy and whole. That evening, after Tyler was asleep and Emma was packing for their flight the next day, I found Margaret in our bedroom. She was looking at photo albums, old pictures from when Emma was young, from when we were young. Look at us, she said, pointing to a photo from our wedding day. We were babies. 29 and 26, I agreed. Thought we knew everything. We knew nothing. She smiled sadly. Robert, I need to tell Emma. About the affair. About what I almost did. No, I said firmly. She looked surprised. But I have to. She deserves to know the truth. She deserves to have a mother she can respect. I countered. She deserves to not have her memory of our marriage tainted by one mistake. Emma's been through hell with her own divorce. She doesn't need to know that her parents almost went through the same thing. But the guilt is yours to carry. That's your consequence. You live with what you know, and you be a better wife, a better mother, a better person because of it. I sat beside her on the bed. Emma never needs to know about David Castellano. As far as she's concerned, we hit a rough patch and worked through it. That's all. Margaret stared at me. Why are you protecting me? Because you're my wife. Because Emma needs you. Because one mistake, however terrible, doesn't erase 43 years of marriage. I paused. And because I love you, even when I hate what you've done. She took my hand, squeezing it tight. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," I said, and we both laughed, a small, painful laugh, but genuine. The next morning, we drove Emma and Tyler to the airport. Emma hugged us both goodbye, holding on extra long to Margaret. "Mom, you seem different," Emma said. "Happier, maybe? More present?" Margaret glanced at me, then smiled at our daughter. "I think I am. Your dad and I have been talking more, spending more time together. It's good. It's really good. I'm glad." Emma kissed her cheek, then mine. "You two are my relationship goals, you know? 43 years and still going strong. It gives me hope that maybe someday I'll find something like that." After they left, Margaret and I drove home in silence. Back at the house, she went straight to the closet where she'd hidden the divorce papers. I watched from the doorway as she pulled them out, stared at them for a long moment, then methodically began tearing them into tiny pieces. "I want to start over," she said, not looking at me. "I want to remember why I married you in the first place. I want to fall in love with you again, if you'll let me." "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. Part 6, 6 months later. It's June now, 6 months since that Christmas. Margaret and I are different people than we were last October. She goes to therapy every week. Not couples therapy, just her own therapy, working through whatever it was that made her vulnerable to someone like David Castellano. I've been going too, working on my own issues, my workaholism, my tendency to take things for granted, my emotional distance. We take walks together every evening now, just talking about our days, our dreams, our fears. Small things, but important things. We're learning how to be married again, how to see each other as people rather than just roles. Husband, wife, parents. I never told her that I orchestrated David's breakup with her. As far as she knows, he just lost interest. She doesn't know about my meeting with him, about the folder of evidence, about the threat I made. Some secrets are mine to keep. Last week, Marcus Webb called me with an update. David Castellano is seeing someone new, a 58-year-old widow with a substantial inheritance. The cycle continues. I thought about warning her, about sending her the information I gathered. But I didn't. I can't save everyone from their own poor choices. I can only protect my own family. Emma calls every Sunday now. She's started dating someone, a teacher at Tyler's school, a good man by all accounts. She sounds happy, hopeful. She talks to both of us, asks our advice, shares her life with us. The bond between her and Margaret is stronger than ever, and I'm grateful for that. And Margaret and I? We're okay. We're not perfect. We'll probably never be perfect. There are still hard days, days when I think about what she did and feel that old anger rising up. Days when she looks at me with guilt in her eyes, and I know she's remembering too. But we're committed to this, to us, to the family we built. We're doing the work, making the effort, choosing each other over and over again. Some people might say I should have divorced her, that I should have exposed her plans, that I should have let her face the full consequences of her actions. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm a fool for taking her back, for forgiving her, for protecting her from the truth of what David really was. But here's what I've learned in my 72 years. Revenge isn't about destruction. Real revenge, the kind that matters, the kind that lasts, is about taking someone's worst intentions and turning them into your victory. Margaret wanted to leave me, to take half of everything, to turn Emma against me, to rewrite our history with herself as the victim and me as the villain. Instead, she's still here, working every day to be a better wife. Emma still respects both of us, still sees us as a model of lasting love. Our history remains intact, unmarred by scandal or betrayal in our daughter's eyes. And Margaret lives with the knowledge of what she almost did, what she almost lost, every single day. That's my revenge. Not pain or humiliation or loss, but the daily reminder of what could have been, paired with the gift of a second chance she doesn't quite believe she deserves. I took her worst plans and broke them into pieces so small that they don't even exist anymore. And in their place, I built something new, something harder, more honest, more real than what we had before. She wanted to destroy us. Instead, I saved us both. And every morning when we wake up together, when she looks at me with gratitude and regret and renewed love, when she tries just a little harder to make me happy, that's when I know I won. Not by destroying her, but by refusing to let her destroy us. That's the sweetest revenge of all. Epilogue, the truth of mercy. Some nights, when Margaret's asleep beside me and the house is quiet, I think about David Castellano. I wonder if he ever thinks about us, about the old man who outmaneuvered him. Probably not. Men like him don't waste time on past conquests. And some nights, I think about the alternate timeline, the one where I didn't follow Margaret that day, where I didn't investigate, where I remained oblivious until she served me with divorce papers. In that timeline, I lose half my assets, my relationship with Emma becomes strained at best, and Margaret eventually learns the hard way that David Castellano wasn't her salvation but her ruin. Everyone loses in that timeline. Instead, I chose a different path. I chose to intervene, to manipulate, to control the narrative before she could. Some might call that underhanded. Some might say I should have just confronted her directly, had it out in a big dramatic confrontation like they do in movies. But I'm not a movie character. I'm just an old engineer who spent his career solving problems, and this was just another problem to solve. The solution required precision, timing, and a willingness to do what needed to be done without ego, without drama, without making it about my hurt feelings. The goal wasn't to make Margaret suffer. The goal was to protect what mattered, our family, our history, our daughter's faith in us. And I succeeded. Margaret still doesn't know how close I came to losing her, not to David Castellano, but to my own pride and anger. She doesn't know that there were nights I lay awake contemplating my own kind of revenge, the kind that would have destroyed her reputation, her relationship with Emma, her sense of self-worth. I could have done that. I had the evidence. I had the means. But revenge that destroys is easy. It's lazy. Any fool can tear something down. Building something better? That takes skill. That takes restraint. That takes a kind of strength most people never have to find. Yesterday was our 44th anniversary. We went to the same restaurant where we had our first date, back in 1981. We ordered the same meal, drank the same wine, sat in the same type of booth. Margaret cried a little, happy tears this time. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on us," I replied. And I meant it. Because here's the final truth, the one I've learned after 72 years on this earth. The best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about becoming better. It's about taking someone's betrayal and using it as fuel to build something stronger than what they tried to break. Margaret tried to leave me for a fantasy. Instead, I gave her a reality worth staying for. She tried to rewrite our history. Instead, I protected it. She tried to turn Emma against me. Instead, I made sure our daughter still has two parents she can love and respect. Every day that Margaret chooses to stay, chooses to work on our marriage, chooses to be better than the person she was in those dark months, that's my victory. Not because I'm keeping her prisoner, but because I gave her the chance to see what she really had before she threw it away for nothing. I broke her plans into pieces so small they disappeared like dust. And from that dust, we grew something new. That's the grandfather's revenge, not destruction, but transformation. Not an ending, but a better beginning. I'm Robert Harrison. I'm 72 years old. I'm a husband, a father, a grandfather. And I saved my family from itself. That's my story. That's my triumph. And I'd do it all again without hesitation.